I once believed in fairy tales. You know, the kind where two people meet, fall in love, and live happily ever after. For 10 years, I thought I was living in one with Natalie. But fairy tales, as it turns out, sometimes become nightmares you can't wake up from. My name is Jake, and this is the story of how the woman I pledged my life to slowly dismantled my sense of self, piece by agonizing piece. We met in college. Her laugh caught my attention across a crowded room. It was infectious, genuine. When she looked at me, I felt seen in a way I never had before. The early years were blissful. Weekend getaways to the coast, lazy Sundays making pancakes, planning our future on napkins at our favorite diner. When she walked down the aisle toward me, I remember thinking I was the luckiest man alive. But happiness is fragile. The change was gradual, almost imperceptible at first, like water slowly eroding stone. A dismissive comment here, a comparison there. Kevin just got promoted again. What's holding you back? Or, God, Mark is so attentive to Sarah. Must be nice. Each remark a tiny cut that eventually formed a wound that wouldn't heal. I started second-guessing every decision. Would this shirt disappoint her? Was my salary enough? Did I laugh too loud at that party? The man I used to be, confident, spontaneous, joyful, began to vanish. In his place stood someone constantly braced for criticism, walking on eggshells in his own home. The passive-aggressive silences stretched for days sometimes. She'd respond to my questions with one-word answers, sighing heavily as though my very presence exhausted her. I'd reach for her in bed and she'd turn away with a theatrical groan. The rejection became routine, expected, yet no less painful each time. Then Emma was born. Our daughter, this perfect, innocent being with Natalie's eyes and my smile. The first time I held her, something resolute took root inside me. I made a silent promise that day. You see, my father walked out when I was 7. The memory of my mother crying at the kitchen table night after night had shaped my entire understanding of commitment. I swore I would never inflict that pain on my own child. So I stayed. Through the public humiliation when Natalie would mock my ideas in front of friends, through the constant emotional warfare that left me depleted. Through it all. Every morning, I'd look at Emma's peaceful, sleeping face and find the strength to endure another day, to absorb another cutting remark, to apologize for another perceived failure. The man in the mirror became someone I barely recognized, but the father in me never wavered. This isn't a story about weakness. It's a story about the quiet strength it takes to remain standing when everything inside you is crumbling. The name fell from Lily's innocent lips with the careless ease that only a child could muster. Daddy, can we get ice cream like Uncle Ben gave me last time? My 6-year-old daughter asked, eyes bright with hope, as we walked through the park on a rare Saturday I wasn't working overtime. I froze mid-step. Uncle Ben. The words echoed in my head like a gunshot in an empty church. We had no Uncle Ben. No brothers on either side of our family carried that name. No close friends either. Uncle Ben? I kept my voice light, casual, though my heart was suddenly hammering. Who's that, sweetheart? Lily twirled, already distracted by a butterfly. Mommy's friend. He comes over when you're working late. He lets me have ice cream even before dinner. Something cold and heavy settled in my stomach as I forced a smile. That's nice of him. That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat alone in our dimly lit kitchen, turning a coffee mug between my palms. The house felt different somehow, as if its walls had been keeping secrets. In the 14 years Natalie and I had been married, I'd never once questioned her loyalty. We had problems, sure. What couple didn't after that long? But infidelity? That thought had never crossed my mind. Until now. Over the following weeks, I became a detective in my own home. I noticed how Natalie's phone would go silent whenever I entered the room. Always face down on surfaces, always accompanied by the subtle click of a screen locking. Her passwords had changed. When had that happened? There were other signs, too, pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was assembling. Unexplained absences, grocery trips that took 3 hours, yoga classes that ran mysteriously long, new clothes I hadn't seen before, a perfume that wasn't from the bottle I'd given her last Christmas. Meeting ran late, she'd say, cheeks flushed as she hurried through the door at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. Traffic was awful, she'd explain on a Sunday afternoon, though the local traffic app on my phone showed all clear roads. When I'd ask simple questions, who called, where she'd been, her responses grew defensive, edged with irritation. Why the interrogation, Jake? Don't you trust me? The irony of that question left a bitter taste in my mouth. One night, as Natalie showered, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I stood there staring at it, moral boundaries I'd never questioned suddenly blurring before my eyes. I didn't touch it. Not that night. But the seed was planted. Something was fundamentally wrong in our marriage. A fracture running through what I'd thought was solid ground. But I wouldn't confront her. Not yet. If there was a truth to be found, I needed more than suspicion. I needed certainty. And so I began to watch, wait, and quietly investigate the unraveling of my life. Jake had been sensing something was off for months. The late nights, the sudden work emergencies, the way Natalie's eyes no longer lingered on his. But suspicion is one thing. Cold, hard proof is another beast entirely. It happened on a rain-soaked Tuesday. Jake was searching for aspirin in Natalie's handbag, a simple, innocent act that would shatter his world forever. His fingers brushed against an orange prescription bottle, the kind with the white child-proof cap. He pulled it out, squinting at the label through reading glasses, expecting to see her usual migraine medication. Instead, what he saw made his blood run cold. Doxycycline, 100 millimeters, for treatment of chlamydia. The bathroom floor seemed to tilt beneath him. Jake steadied himself against the marble countertop, his wedding ring clinking against the stone, a cruel reminder of vows now broken. His mind raced back through the past few months, her sudden disinterest in intimacy, the late-night showers, the guarded text messages. His first impulse was to confront her, to scream and demand answers, to let 15 years of marriage collapse into chaos and recrimination. But something deeper within him, perhaps the same instinct that had made him so successful in business, told him to wait, to plan. "This isn't about winning an argument," Jake whispered to his reflection, his voice steadier than he expected. "This is about protecting what matters." The next morning, while Natalie thought he was at his regular management meeting, Jake sat across from Diana Winters, one of the city's most formidable divorce attorneys. 2 days later, he retained Michael Reeves, an ex-police detective turned private investigator with a reputation for discretion and thoroughness. "I need evidence," Jake explained, sliding an envelope of cash across Reeves's desk. "Not just of the affair, but of everything." What Reeves uncovered over the next 3 weeks transformed Jake's heartbreak into cold resolve. Photo documentation showed a man, later identified as Natalie's gym trainer, entering their home less than 20 minutes after Jake left for work. More disturbing were the time-stamped images showing their 7-year-old daughter, Emma, left alone in the backyard for hours, while Natalie and her lover were inside. "She's not just betraying me," Jake realized, studying the photos in his downtown hotel room, where he'd retreated to think. "She's betraying our daughter, too." Jake's transformation was remarkable to witness. The wounded husband disappeared, replaced by a man with clear eyes and steady hands. He documented household expenses, secured copies of financial records, and cataloged assets. He started recording Natalie's increasingly erratic behavior toward Emma. Each night, he updated a detailed journal, building his case methodically, like assembling armor for the battle ahead. "I won't be a victim in this story," Jake told his reflection, and I won't let Emma become one either. Jake sat in his attorney's office, a subtle smile playing at the corners of his mouth as they reviewed the final preparations. For 18 months, he'd been meticulously building his case, transferring assets into carefully structured accounts under his daughter's name, legal trusts that Natalie could never touch. The divorce proceedings were scheduled to begin tomorrow, and Jake was not just prepared, he was 3 steps ahead. She genuinely believes she'll walk away with half of everything plus hefty alimony, Jake said, his voice steady but tinged with a cold determination. She has no idea what's coming. His attorney nodded, spreading out the documentation across the mahogany desk. The private investigator's evidence is substantial, Jake. The affairs, the neglect of your daughter while you were working. It's all here. The next morning, Jake watched as Natalie strutted into the courtroom, designer handbag swinging from her arm, confidence radiating from her like heat from asphalt in summer. Her attorney leaned in, whispering something that made her smile, probably promises of the windfall she expected. Jake maintained his composure, years of business negotiations having taught him the power of an unreadable face. Hour by hour, Jake's strategy unfolded like a masterclass in preparation. The judge reviewed the financial disclosures, and Natalie's smile began to falter. When her attorney requested access to Jake's savings, her first shock came. Your Honor, these accounts are legally established trusts for the minor child, Jake's attorney explained calmly, presenting the documentation. Established well before any marital discord, they are not marital assets subject to division. Natalie's expression cracked, but the true devastation arrived with the private investigator's testimony. Photos appeared on screens throughout the courtroom, Natalie with various men while their daughter waited forgotten at dance class, text messages arranging rendezvous during times she was supposedly caring for their child, evidence of neglect so clear it couldn't be disputed. Jake watched as the blood drained from Natalie's face. This wasn't the script she had written in her mind. When the judge finally delivered his ruling, the courtroom fell silent. No alimony. Minimal settlement due to the prenuptial agreement Jake had insisted upon years ago. Full custody of their daughter awarded to Jake, with Natalie granted only supervised visitation pending completion of parenting classes. And the final blow, consideration of damages for the emotional distress caused to both Jake and their child. This court finds the respondent's conduct throughout the marriage demonstrates a pattern of deception and neglect, the judge concluded. As they exited the courtroom, Jake caught Natalie's gaze. Her eyes, once calculating and cold, now held only shock and the dawning realization that her carefully constructed world had collapsed. Jake had not just protected himself, he had outmaneuvered her at every turn. The game was rigged from the start, he thought. She just didn't realize I was the one setting the rules. Looking back now, I realized that some lessons can only be learned through fire, the kind that burns away everything you thought you knew, leaving only the hard, unvarnished truth behind. It's been 6 months since everything with Natalie came crashing down. 6 months of rebuilding, of learning to sleep soundly again, of watching my daughter smile without that shadow behind her eyes. And in that time, I've thought a lot about what happened, not just the betrayal, but my response to it. Here's what I know for certain. Your instincts are trying to protect you. That nagging feeling I had for months, it wasn't paranoia, it was self-preservation. We're conditioned to doubt ourselves, to give second chances, to believe explanations that don't add up. But your gut knows. It always knows. Protection isn't selfish. It's necessary. When I discovered Natalie's plans, the accounts, the lawyer consultations, the calculated dismantling of our life together, I had a choice. I could confront her, rage against her, give her the chance to weave more lies. Or I could protect what was mine. My daughter's future, my financial stability, my dignity. I chose protection. Natalie showed up at my door 3 weeks ago. The expensive highlights had grown out, the designer clothes replaced by something more modest. Her investment schemes had collapsed spectacularly. She told me she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd been misled by bad advice and worse friends, that she missed us, missed home. I looked into those eyes, the same eyes that had watched me sleep while plotting my financial ruin, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no love, just a profound emptiness where something vital once lived. "I'm sorry you're struggling," I told her, "but this isn't your home anymore." She called it revenge. I call it consequences. I call it justice without the spectacle of courts and lawyers and public humiliation. I call it protecting my peace. Some might judge my actions as cold, calculated, even vengeful. But I didn't destroy Natalie. I simply refused to let her destroy me. There's a difference. I didn't push her off the cliff. I just stepped away from the edge and watched her own momentum carry her over. If there's wisdom in what happened, it's this. Self-respect demands boundaries with teeth. Strategic thinking isn't manipulation, it's survival. And a betrayal profound enough to threaten your child's future deserves a response in kind. So I ask you, what would you have done? When faced with someone willing to smile in your face while slipping the knife between your ribs, would you have offered the other side of your chest? Or would you have done what was necessary to walk away intact? The answer, I think, says everything about who you truly are.